After spending a couple of years obsessing over Batman, I found myself getting into more superhero media outside of what the Caped Crusader has to offer, and having recently finished his filmography, I've become a big fan of Spider-Man. True, not all of the movies were great, but the ones that were really enraptured me. And outside of the great characters and exciting action, I found that it was the central conflict at the core of the character that really stood out to me. The way that the responsibilities of the average high schooler and the superhero would clash and intersect was really compelling, and it made the quieter moments just as thrilling as the big action scenes. And being a gamer, I naturally found myself interested in Insomniac's acclaimed take on the character to enjoy some more Spidey action outside of the films, and being a reviewer, I also wanted to share my thoughts on the game. So, that's what I'm about to do. Alright, so I imagine you all know what the backstory of Peter Parker / Spider-Man is. And so does the game, as the story completely glosses over that part and instead follows the characters 8 years into his crime-fighting career. That makes for a really refreshing change of pace, as we get to see the cast having already gone through the motions we're used to seeing and instead get to see where they've ended up. Aunt May works at a homeless centre, Mary Jane is now a reporter for the Daily Bugle, whilst her relationship with Peter has reached a dead end, and Peter himself currently finds himself working for Dr. Otto Octavius, who is close to a breakthrough with his new robotic arms. Because that's gonna end well. Spider-Man will also meet some new faces over the course of the game who experience their own side stories, all of which eventually intertwine with the greater narrative as an escalating gang war begins to threaten innocent lives, including those close to Peter. Well, that's a really good setup for a Spider-Man story, and the game doesn't disappoint in its execution either. The plot constantly flips between both Peter and Spider-Man with complete ease, wonderfully setting up the larger stakes before bringing them down to a more personal scale later on. But while the events that occur are very interesting and in certain parts surprising, it's the characters that really made the story compelling. I'm not even sure what it is specifically about them here that really struck a chord with me. Maybe it's the fact that I'm not used to seeing them outside of the origin phase, so I was instantly interested in what they were up to. Could it be the fantastic voice work, the way that everyone seems to engage in their own little acts of heroism outside of Spider-Man? Well, it's probably all of those things in combination with the superb writing that blends the superhero action and the character-driven drama excellently. There aren't that many supervillains or big comic book set pieces for most of the game, so on the instances that something massive does happen, I was constantly interested in how this would affect the ensemble and their relationships with one another. There's some genuinely powerful dramatic beats where you really grow to care about the cast, but there's also plenty of humour, fun and excitement sprinkled throughout that left me with a smile, and it made the characters as likeable as they are interesting. However, there's a big development that takes place at the beginning of the third act where the plot suddenly becomes more superhero-y and less compelling. Suddenly a ton of supervillains are thrown into the foray who aren't given much to do outside of being boss fights, and all the characters you become invested in can feel a bit ignored. It pays off with a really unexpected ending though, but part of me wishes the game took a risk and only had a couple of baddies in the story. Still, I really loved this interpretation of the Spider-Man universe and its characters, in which it took that central dilemma, put it on a grander scale, and combined the worlds of both Peter Parker and Spider-Man seamlessly. But what you might not have expected is for that to apply to the actual game too. You spent a decent amount of time playing as just Peter, exploring locations and occasionally solving one of these Valve puzzles, which are simple but pretty fun. You'll also get to play as some other characters, but I'll get to them later. For now, let's look at how Spider-Man himself translates to video games, or this game at least. Part of the appeal for most people will be getting to ping and swing across New York, and it is a ton of fun. It can take a little getting used to, but running up buildings, launching off rooftops, and gaining momentum all set to a bombastic score is incredibly thrilling. The open world of New York is fine, not particularly memorable or anything, but it is fun to traverse. There are some collectibles and side activities to find throughout the city too, and I did find myself going off the beaten track every now and then to look for them, and once I finished the story, I did go back and activate all of the towers. But does the game build a solid enough base for the gameplay to make the player want to experience everything this game has to offer outside of the missions? Well, as easy a comparison as it sounds, it does owe a lot to the Arkham series. You've got free-flowing combat, stealth where you play more as the hunter than the hunted, and there's even a Scarecrow-esque sequence later on. But it is a great formula, and while I don't think the gameplay is as good as it is in Arkham City, it's still great fun. I wasn't really expecting there to be much stealth going into the game, but you do partake in it quite a bit. The game will tell you whether or not it's safe to take out an enemy, and there really isn't much to it outside of using your webs to lure enemies into your wrath, but it is quite enjoyable, and the takedowns are pretty satisfying to pull off. It is kind of hard to go back into stealth mode when you get spotted, but these sections won't give you much frustration. But similar to the Arkham games, what's really fun about these parts is having the upper hand and strategically trying to eliminate the room with as little hassle as possible, and some extra side tasks where you can't be spotted are also really fun. Another cool thing is how the game takes you out of your comfort zone when you have to play as either MJ or Miles Morales, sneaking your way through the environment without any of the cool powers you're used to using. It becomes much more linear and pretty suspenseful, once again having to use some initiative by using the environment and eventually a taser. There's also this great sequence where MJ has to instruct Spider-Man when to clear the path of enemies, and it's just really exciting to play through. Then we have the hand-to-hand combat. Again, much like the Arkham games, you'll seamlessly move from enemy to enemy, use numerous gadgets, or in this case different types of web shooter, use certain tactics on certain foes, and it plays great. All of the webs are really fun to use, and punching enemies upwards to give them an aerial beatdown is incredibly satisfying. Wait, does Spider-Man have a no-kill rule?
You two stay here.
Guess
Wait
not.
for the police.
What really surprised me about the combat is how often I died, even in the earlier missions. This game can really put your skills to the test, but it's the fun kind of challenge, and no section got me to the point of frustration. For the most part. When you get to the last third of the game, the difficulty is ramped up by having so many enemies coming at you with guns and rocket launchers, not to mention these airborne guys that are an absolute pain to hit. And this is happening all at once. Oh, God!
Riker's escapees are down. Need to deal with Sable's flying monkeys.
Okay, almost finished this damn section. Ah, crap! It's not gonna send me back to the start, is it? Please don't, please don't, please don't. Oh, come on! I had to keep changing the difficulty so I could get through some of these encounters without becoming incredibly frustrated. I know it sounds like I just can't be bothered to get more skilled, but jeez, it was just way too overwhelming to handle. Oof. Well, on a more positive note, the rest of the campaign has plenty of variety, from chasing cars, pretty thrilling quick-time events, treacherous traversal sections, and parts where the pace slows down and allows you to search an environment for important items. And while the villains get shortchanged in the story, they do at least lead to some really good boss fights that take full advantage of Spidey's toolset. I did struggle with one that again had way too much going on, but for the most part, they're great encounters. And that's everything I have to say about the game, but before I reach the conclusion, I should say that I'm not going to score it. I'm confident in scoring movies because I'm summating one sitting's worth of content, whereas a game can be spread over a couple of weeks and multiple sessions. And in Spider-Man's case, there were some sessions that I really didn't enjoy thanks to the irritating difficulty and the less involving story beats. But before then, I was in love with this game, having a blast with the gameplay and being utterly hooked by the story. The game also ends on a high note, which can make it easy to ignore all the underwhelming stuff that preceded it. But the stuff that worked for me was too damn good for me not to recommend the game despite the sections I found tough to put up with. It's still a really great open world superhero game that doesn't quite reach the heights of the first two Arkham games, but there were many times when it came close. The characters are great, the gameplay is great, the presentation is great. It's just a great game that's well worth swinging into action for.